The football gods are cruel, man. After a near flawless 3-year rebuild, 2024 was set up to be the Lions' year. And few fans deserved to win it all more than Lions fans who have been through the ringer over the years. Hell, even the whole country rallied behind America's favorite underdog. Yet, the football gods decide, hey, that awesome D-line of yours, yeah, we're taking that back. And with that, all of your playoff hopes and dreams. And to make matters worse, the ensuing offseason, your all-pro center's going to elect for early retirement. All of your coaches are going to get hired elsewhere. And by the way, Micah Parsons is a Packer now. Tough. But not all hope is lost, Lions fans, because you still have Dan Campbell. And you know that Dan Campbell is the last person that's going to sit around and cry about it. In fact, he's the first person in that room to stand up, pound the table, say, screw the football gods. We're still loaded with talent. We can do this ourselves. My people, welcome to the 2025 Detroit Lions Deep Dive. Okay, maybe that intro was a little bit dramatic, but at the end of the day, what's Lions football without a little drama anyway? The fact is, this Lions team does still have the utmost potential, coming in with the number 3 spot in my power rankings for this series as we head into the start of the season. But after an offseason full of turnover and brain drain with the coaching staff, they do inevitably have some questions that will need answered as this season goes on. And in today's video, we'll talk about some of those green lights that they do need to hit if they're going to achieve that ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl here in 2025. Now, before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor and take just a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help me out. Also, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our last 2 remaining deep dives here over the course of the next few days. And you're not going to want to miss my regular season content here, full of weekly game reactions, power rankings. We're going to be doing a lot of positional tier maker videos this year. Those have been very popular, so lots of stuff still to come once this series is complete. But without further ado, let's get into this Lions deep dive. And as always in this series, we go through every position group as well as the coaching staff. And with each of those chapters, we begin that conversation by taking a look at their offseason and asking whether they got better, worse, or stayed the same at each spot. And that begins with the coaching staff here, which, let's face it, this is the overriding narrative on what's going to decide the success of the 2025 Detroit Lions. It is rare to see this much brain drain, is the common term, but this many departures for a team and their coaching staff. Not just losing both excellent coordinators, especially Ben Johnson, who we hyped up big time in the Bears deep dive, their highly applauded offensive coordinator, leaving interdivision. A sting that Lions fans have been preparing for 2 years because of the job that Ben Johnson has done. We knew it was going to happen eventually, and that alone would be a big loss for any team. But Aaron Glenn as well, within the same offseason, leaves as their defensive coordinator to take the New York Jets head coaching job. And with him, he brings Tanner Engstrand, who's been in this building for a long time now, that I think many people had pegged as the likely person to step up as their offensive coordinator. Now, maybe Detroit and Dan Campbell felt he wasn't fit for that job. And honestly, if that's what Dan Campbell thinks, I think we can trust him on that, but still an interesting departure there as well. But yeah, this is a huge narrative with this team, is how they're going to be able to replace those guys. In turn, they are going to be going with John Morton as the offensive coordinator. They are loosely familiar with him. He spent the 2022 season on this staff, but has mostly been a Sean Payton guy and has been in Denver with Sean Payton over the last couple of years. He returns to Detroit to be this team's offensive coordinator. And then they're going to promote the young Kelvin Sheppard to be their defensive coordinator, who very recently was playing linebacker in the NFL as recently as 2018. An impressive ascension to the defensive coordinator ranks for Sheppard there. But let's break this coaching staff down in depth. And at the top of all of this, you still have Dan Campbell, which should be what Lions fans can hang their hat on. But needless to say, it's a big year for Dan Campbell to really prove that, he is here to stay and these Lions are here to stay. As impressive as a job as he and these Lions have done in this 4-year rebuild, this is the first time they've really been tested in terms of losing talent. It has been a steady climb, both with the ascension of the coaching staff with Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn as kind of the two other sides of the trident, if you will, with Dan Campbell being that middle piece and the CEO, overseer of this team. But this is the first time where they've had a departure of roster talent and of course the coaches here as well. And Dan Campbell as kind of a CEO style guy. The biggest question with anybody in that type of position is going to be, can you continue to replenish your coordinators so that you can stay relevant over a sustained, tenure? And we're going to find that out this year. Everything Dan Campbell has done in Detroit screams, give me the benefit of the doubt. We're going to be just fine. We're going to figure this out. But the reality is we just have not had to see this yet. So it's a big year just to see if they're going to be, in fact, just fine with Dan Campbell as their head coach. But as long as he can nail these coordinator hires, we know that Dan Campbell is one of, if not the best coaches in the NFL at this point at establishing team culture. It was kind of a meme when he came out in that opening press conference and was, talking about biting kneecaps off. And, every coach kind of says similar type of stuff like, oh, we're going to be a physical football team, blah, blah, blah. But it's just different with Dan Campbell and how the Lions have really established that as a team identity in a way that other teams just haven't. Like, you really do just feel the kneecap biting aspect of this Lions team. They just somehow play more physical than anybody else in the league, and that's not a disrespect to other really physical football teams, but it really is just different with the Detroit Lions, and that is really something special that Dan Campbell has brought to the table. So as we head into the start of this season, I have Dan Campbell as our 7th ranked overall head coach. And I think that shows a lot of respect to the job he's done, the culture that he has built and should continue to establish here in Detroit. But whether he can really continue to climb these ranks even higher into the top 5, into the top 3, is just going to be contingent on him proving that now with this coaching turnover, he's got it handled, he's got a plan, and he's going to oversee this thing to be just fine. Whereas a lot of people are panicking about the departure of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn right now, and rightfully so, because those are two now young head coaches headed elsewhere that we're very excited about. And whether you like it or not, Lions fans, this year Dan Campbell has to prove, yet again, unfortunately, that he is the captain of this thing and that he wasn't more of a passenger of those two coordinators actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. And I love Dan Campbell. It sounds harsh to say that, but basically what I'm getting at here is there's a world where it turns out, yep, Aaron Glenn is going to go be a super successful head coach with the New York Jets, run a great defense there. Ben Johnson's going to do the same on the offensive side of the ball with the Bears. And maybe Dan Campbell is still a very good coach, but maybe not an elite coach. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not projecting that to be the case, but I do think it's a possibility. And this year is just a very huge year to find out just who Dan Campbell and these Detroit Lions are in that aspect. But obviously, we have to have some pretty detailed conversations about who these coordinators are, what types of schemes they're going to run, and if these were good hires and promotions for the Lions. So let's start on the offensive side of things with John Morton. This is a very fascinating offensive coordinator and coach, in my opinion, because you look at his resume and it's kind of mind-blowing that he hasn't really risen the ranks and settled in as at least a established offensive coordinator and play caller in the NFL. At 55 years old now, it's pretty hard to find a more impressive resume of guys that he's worked with. I mean, seriously, he started way back in 1998 under John Gruden with the Raiders in Oakland, and then under Bill Callahan after that. It's another big name. And then Gruden remembered him a whole 20 years later, and he comes back with John Gruden to the Raiders from 2019 to 2021. But he also worked under Pete Carroll at USC, and then Lane Kiffin after that, so a couple big names there. And then most prominently, he's been a Sean Payton guy throughout his career. He had 1 year with the Saints in 2006, returned about 10 years later after mostly that USC stint, to coach under Sean Payton. He did then leave and got an offensive coordinator opportunity, if you can even call it that. I mean, he was the offensive coordinator for the Chan Gailey, Bryce Petty, Christian Hackenberg year with the New York Jets. I can't really call that an opportunity. That's more of a, you're getting screwed here. He might have, established himself as an offensive coordinator in the NFL long before that if he didn't have that blemish on his resume, but hard to hold that against him, right? I think Dan Campbell understands that. But he then returns to the Raiders for a few years, spends 1 year here in Detroit under Dan Campbell, someone he presumably would have coached with, in 2016 under Sean Payton there as a part of that offensive staff in New Orleans. So some familiarity there. And then goes to reunite with Sean Payton over the last few years in Denver. So this dude has really run it all, especially under John Gruden and Sean Payton, has learned so much of the modern pro spread philosophies that Ben Johnson's offense was really centered around as well. So a highly qualified coach that, definitely it was ready for him to get an opportunity as a play caller. And there's a lot of potential for him as well to stand out here with Detroit. But it's just unproven, right? He hasn't been here in Detroit the last 2 years as they've reached these offensive heights and the team chemistry on offense that they have over the last few years. Ben Johnson was just so spectacular, both with the kind of down-to-down operation, with the balance of the run game and the pass game, but then you also bring in the idea of all the trick plays and stuff that have unironically become a huge part of the Lions' success. And Ben Johnson's ability to thrive as an offensive coordinator is kind of the balance of those two things. So it's just really hard to say if Morton's going to have that same kind of it factor as a play caller and an offensive coach. And on one hand, you look at the resume and say, oh my God, that's impressive. Theoretically, the sky is the limit with his pool of knowledge. On the other hand, it's well, he has spent 30 years around the NFL and really has never broken through. Is it really going to happen here? You could really take either approach mentally going into this season, but really only time will tell as far as how good he's going to be. So with the Lions, it's hard to kind of put a ranking on them. I think they have earned a lot of benefit of the doubt here to not come out and rank them just dead last in terms of offensive coaching. And Dan Campbell does have an offensive background. He's going to be in the room making sure things are going to transition well from Ben Johnson to John Morton as well. So they come out kind of middle of the pack for me for pass game coaching, ranking 14th to 21st there. And then still above average in terms of run game coaching, where they rank 12th to 15th. Those certainly aren't the top 5 rankings that they would have had if Ben Johnson just returned here. But you should still see, especially with a veteran quarterback and Dan Campbell still in there and a lot of the other staff still in place, although they have been picked apart there as well with some of their assistants. But you should still see some bit of a continuation of the scheming success that they've had here. And I think especially when you talk about that run game coaching grade being pretty nice for Detroit there, the Dan Campbell of it all does apply just outside of the scheme. The kneecap-biting Dan Campbell of it all definitely applies to how they run the ball and how they stop the run. Like I said, it is just different with this team, the way that they come out and smash you in the face. And that, just by the definition of it, is going to help you in the run game on both sides of the ball. So that will show up there with the offense and the defense. But yeah, a true wild card, pivotal factor for this Lions team, just as the defensive coaching under Kelvin Sheppard will be as well. But before we do talk about Kelvin Sheppard and the defensive side of things, I do want to talk at least a little bit more about what the Lions kind of do schematically and how I kind of expect Morton coming in here to be kind of a continuation of really the core philosophy of what this offense has looked like. And this Lions offense has really been, at least by today's standards, very much a modern but pro-style offense, a team that is not afraid to come out under center and get into a lot of concepts and formations that you might have seen back in the early 2000s, and certainly before that as well into the 20th century, but really coming out in those heavy formations where the Lions were third in the league in 12 personnel usage. So certainly a team that's not afraid to come out, play old school football, hit you in the mouth with those heavier packages, run the ball from under center. And their run game has been incredibly balanced. They really vary things and keep you on your toes in terms of trying to know what they're going to throw at you. They run everything in the book: gap, duo, inside zone, outside zone, counter, pin and pull, jet sweeps, you name it. Like, you have to be prepared for the whole kitchen sink, at least when Ben Johnson was here. And the hope is that, that's all going to stay the same as an identity for this team. And I really think that's what Dan Campbell wants for his vision of this offense, is to, first and foremost, put the fear of God into you with the threat of multiple tight ends out there and a diverse, complex run game that also has that thunder and lightning approach, right? Where you can get those explosive plays from Jahmyr Gibbs, but also the idea of having a David Montgomery that can just grind things out and make it suck to stop this run game, play in, play out. They really bring it all to the table. And then what's really set things over the edge with this team being so hard to defend is having that identity, but then pairing it with really everything you could possibly see in the book in terms of modern scheming in the NFL. Whether it's the use of a lot of those Shanahan-style principles, running a lot more outside zone than your typical, classic pro-style offense that's more of a north and south run game might see. And then, of course, having so many of those Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay-inspired play-action concepts off of it to use the threat of the run to scheme guys open for easier looks in the passing game and explosive chunks in the passing game. But then getting into a lot of the shotgun stuff too. Like, they will run the ball out of shotgun for sure. That's a big part of Jahmyr Gibbs being here. They'll spread you out. Use the threat of having a Sam Laporta where he can, be an inline tight end, but you also got to be prepared for you to just go 2x2, classic spread style, and get into a lot of that stuff and lighten up the box and open things up for the run game with the Jahmyr Gibbs there. The way they use pre-snap motion is as good as anybody. They just really have everything you could possibly imagine available to them within this offense. And that all sounds amazing in principle, but it's a testament to Ben Johnson that he's been able to kind of keep that all within the bubble and keep the right balance and know what buttons to push at the right time and be able to coach these guys to run such a multiple, complex, diverse offense. It's a lot to ask for a John Morton to come in and in 1 year just kind of have that all under wraps. And it certainly is possible that, they're going to have to kind of dial back a little bit with John Morton. But it's possible that they maybe don't have to do that, right? So we will see how this goes at the end of the day. That goes without saying. But let's turn the page to the defensive coaching here with Kelvin Sheppard stepping in as the defensive coordinator now. Now, he is a huge wild card, and he needs to prove that he as well is the right hire here from Dan Campbell and that he can, at a young age here, 37 years old, with just 4 years of NFL coaching experience, run an NFL defense. You're going to have some at least question marks to see how this is going to go here. But as far as, schematically speaking, and this being a continuation of what they've done here, I think that's really expected, right? He has spent his 4 years as an NFL coach all here in Detroit under Aaron Glenn. Dan Campbell likes what he's seen there, and he gets the internal promotion here. So you're really expecting a continuation of their scheme, which has been really a unique defense, frankly, compared to the style that so many teams in the league play today. So much of the league is trending towards that nickel base structure with, pre-snap two-shell looks and, all of the Fangio, McDonald, Saleh style defenses permeating throughout the league. It's fun to watch a defense that is, on this side of the ball as well, a bit of a throwback in terms of style. So much so that the Lions led the league in base defense run last year. Base being, 4 defensive backs on the field, either a 4-3 or a 3-4 style structure. And they ran it 44% of the time last year. That's crazy in the modern NFL. Way more than the rest of the league. The next team down was the Rams that ran at 36.5% of the time. So still 8% less than Detroit. And the Rams had to do it because their interior D-line was so thin. And then there were just 3 other teams that ran at over 30% that were like just over 30%. And the league average is about 22%. So they literally run base double the league average of their kind of base 4-3 structure. And they are more 4-3 than they are 3-4, but they will mix things up and have some of those multiple looks as well. I know we're getting pretty numbers heavy here, but of those 44% of snaps that they played a base defensive front, 88% of it was in their 4-3 looks, where this team trots out as many linebackers, snap count-wise, as anybody in the league. And then 12% obviously was more of a 3-4 type of front. But it all just kind of molds together at this point, and structure-wise, they are just incredibly multiple, and they love to load the box, stop the run, so that they can then get to third down, where there as well, they kind of play a unique style of football. They play that throwback, blitz-heavy, bump-and-run style coverage that Aaron Glenn really learned under Dennis Allen. A lot of similarities scheme-wise to what we talked about with the Bears deep dive and Dennis Allen there. But the Lions led the league in cover 1 last year, and they were top 5 in blitz rate on top of that. So they are who they are. They're not going to hide it. They're going to come out and basically say, F you, you're not running the football on us. We are going to outnumbers you, and like, if you're going to beat us, it is going to be through the air. It is not going to be running the football on us, and they have been an elite run defense here over the last couple of years with that style. And then when it gets to third down, it's like, look, we're not overcomplicating this thing. Either you're going to beat us man-to-man and you're going to block our blitzes, or you're not. Now, with that said, even though they led the league in man coverage last year, running at about 35% of the time, they're still obviously going to be 2/3 of their calls are zone coverage. That's just kind of how the NFL works. So what they do very well, I will give them credit, is they don't just, like, you would think a team that runs that much cover 1, their preferred zone coverage would just be running cover 3 because it looks the same pre-snap with a single high structure. And preferred is the wrong word. Every team's preferred zone coverage is cover 3. Like, literally 31 out of 32 teams, their most run zone call was cover 3. The Jags were the only team that actually ran more cover 2 than they did cover 3. So obviously, like, their most preferred one is cover 3, but it's balanced. It's not like the majority of their zone calls are cover 3 like you might expect. I figured running 35% cover 1, you would see them running 35% of their total coverages would be cover 3 because that just makes sense. No, only 20% of their zone calls were cover 3. They were really balanced in terms of kind of keeping you on your heels, actually running their fair share of quarters and cover 6 and cover 2. So if they're not going to go cover 1, they're at least going to make sure that they're not predictable in terms of their zone calls on the back of it. So you can kind of basically set it up so that offensive coordinators don't just know what you're going to do every play. And that's when you can really run into trouble where teams, and especially in this division against coordinators like Matt LaFleur and Kevin O'Connell and now Ben Johnson, like, assuming they're going to run things the same way, that's at least like, that's a big part of being an offensive coordinator, right? Is knowing what coverage you're going to get at the right time, pressing that button, and then getting that busted coverage or finding that perfect hole shot against the right zone. You do know there's a 1 out of 3 chance basically that you're going to get man-to-man and that you're likely going to get blitzed. But the 2 out of 3 other plays, like, you don't really know what zone coverage necessarily is going to be coming your way. So I do like the unpredictable nature of their zone, and it's certainly a very fun brand of football to watch. And I think it's a very fun brand of football for these players to exist in that kind of pairs nicely with that kneecap biting mentality. Like, it makes sense that if you're going to preach the idea that we're going to be tougher than anybody, you back it up with the scheme and run more base defense than anybody else and blitz about as much as anybody else and play as much press man coverage as anybody else. Like, that's kind of the meat and potatoes, the peanut butter and jelly, like, pairing that makes sense if that's the style you're going to preach. But it also isn't always perfect. I know I praise them for some of the unpredictable nature of the zone calls, but you do, generally speaking, know what you're going to get. And if it's not working, we have seen some uglier performances from this Lions defense as well. Most notably, kind of as the roster talent fell off, Aaron Glenn and that defense really got picked apart by the Washington Commanders. And we have, again, seen some other like uglier looking performances where I'm not fully confident, at least, that the pass defense coaching is brilliant here. I didn't think it was brilliant under Aaron Glenn. That was a criticism that we held in that Jets deep dive as well. And now with Kelvin Sheppard, which is 4 years of coaching experience, that is where you're going to have a lot of question marks on this side of the ball. In fact, they come in tied as low as anybody for pass defense coaching. They rank with a C grade, which isn't like, horrible or anything like that. It's just kind of that placeholder ranking for like, all right, let's see how this goes as far as this series is concerned. But they are tied with 4 other teams. They're ranking 29th to 32nd for pass defense coaching. Whereas, again, like the run defense side of things, I'm much less worried. I think the way they scheme things up, the way they preach things, it's going to translate. They come in as high as 10th for run defense coaching, 10th to 14th there with a B+ grade. And Kelvin Sheppard as well comes from that linebacker background. I'm much less worried there. But again, we have seen with this Lions defense, yes, when it's working, when you can blitz, when you can play press man and you're overwhelming teams with that style, it works. But have we seen this Lions team really adapt and have success? Maybe playing a little bit more pre-snap two-shell, blitzing a little bit less, having a defense that is good at running zone coverage with the proper communication on the back end that is required. If you're going to play a lot of quarters, you're going to play a lot of cover 6. Communication is key on the back end, and that's a part of coaching as well. And I will admit, like, that is where Detroit has run into some more troubles, in my opinion, is when they're forced out of the man cover stuff. Can they adapt? I don't know that the answer to that was yes under Aaron Glenn, and obviously with Kelvin Sheppard, his protege, you're going to have some question marks as well. So that's probably the one key holdup there with the defensive side. But it's a fun style, and I'm excited to see where this goes. I think these were good candidates for Dan Campbell to pick, but needless to say, we had to spend a lot of time on this because this is the biggest wild card for this entire Lions team. As we shift the conversation towards the roster now, they have a lot less questions, but they do have questions. They saw some turnover this offseason, so let's now shift that focus towards that conversation. But before we do begin breaking down this offensive roster here, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video who will pair perfectly with the conversation about the offensive roster, and that is Underdog Fantasy. With the season fastly approaching here, Underdog is the perfect complement to your football Sundays or Thursdays or Fridays or Saturdays or Mondays. I mean, what day do we not get NFL football at this point in 2025? But Underdog is the perfect complement with their daily competitions. Their pick'ems are my favorite way to start my mornings, where you string together your lineups, picking highers, picking lowers on who you think is going to go off, or, of course, who you think might struggle in an individual matchup. The payouts can be huge, which is obviously what we're going here for. But even the smaller level entries just keep you more interested in every game you're watching. So, like, week 1, we got some pretty good matchups. But as we know, as the season goes on, you can get those crummy Thursday night games. Well, Underdog Pick'ems will definitely help you get through some of those tougher matchups for sure. And then you guys, there's, as of this video posting, there's a few days left to get in on Underdog's best ball competitions as well. Best ball is super underrated. It lets you scratch that itch for a fantasy draft. If you're like me and you're already in 9 fantasy leagues, but you just want to do more drafts, you can go do that here throughout the season, but especially these next 3 days here. Go sign up on Underdog. You can play best ball where it's all about the draft. It's you do the draft, it's set it, forget it, and then they will set your best lineups based on your team throughout the course of the season, and you can win some big money there as well. So Underdog is the perfect complement to you football fans. Now is the time to sign up. You use code TFG. You'll show your support for this channel and this deep dive series, but they'll give you a bonus match as well. So thank you to Underdog for being an awesome platform and for being a great sponsor over the years. Good luck to all of you if you do sign up. Play responsibly, of course, and have some fun in the process. But with that, let's get into this roster, where we will begin with the quarterback conversation and looking at their offseason changes. By the way, I don't think I actually said it out loud for those listening along to the podcast version of this show. Obviously, the coaching staff was downgraded. I didn't mention that. But at quarterback, they are staying neutral. No significant changes there. Hendon Hooker gets cut. Not a huge surprise to those that caught my draft analysis that year. At least I had one win out of my horrible analysis on that, 2022 Lions draft. But filling in as the backup here is Kyle Allen, and Teddy Bridgewater also didn't end up getting listed there as a loss, too. He is going to sign with Tampa here. Teddy was in there for a little bit last year as the backup, right? Not the whole season. But anyway, not super notable. Staying neutral at quarterback from this offseason with Jared Goff. Of course, the Lions kind of new franchise quarterback, really. Getting that big contract extension last offseason. Obviously, Goff has been here for the extent of the Dan Campbell era, but he didn't really come in as the de facto franchise quarterback. They were going to see how this went. And looking back on everything that's played out here with Goff in Detroit, it's been really fun to watch, man. I'm proud of my analysis looking back on the 2021 when they made that trade. Goff was really a throw-in in that trade, and there wasn't a ton of fascination that Goff could turn into the player he is here. And I'm not going to act like I predicted that this was going to happen or anything. I still felt like eventually they were going to make that move for more of their QB of the future. But what I did say about that trade was, like, this is kind of what Jared Goff needs, right? Like, in reality, he's kind of been that fed with a silver spoon, 5-star prospect, plays his college ball in the middle of the woods there in California. Yeah, he had the one rough rookie year for the Rams, but really played, again, in that California cool environment in an offense with Sean McVay that kind of held his hand, and he would walk up to the line and McVay would basically tell him what to do before the communications cut off and all this stuff. Like, I'm not afraid to say, like, he's been kind of helped along and had a kind of chill environment up until he was a throw-in in the Matthew Stafford trade when the Rams said, no, we need something better than you, Jared Goff. He comes into Detroit and has to earn it again, and I think that's when he's really evolved as not just a player, but as a human. And by no means am I saying he doesn't have great work ethic. He clearly does, to have evolved in the way that he does, but he hasn't had to need that great work ethic because of his environment up until that Lions trade. And we've really seen Goff evolve as a quarterback and turn into, in my opinion, such a better player than he was in those years with the Rams. And we've really gotten to see Goff evolve into one of the better overall pocket passing, field general types of QBs. Someone with really top 5 processing, decision making, anticipation, pairing that with a very strong arm, excellent accuracy, and quarterback upside becomes such a tough conversation, frankly, because everybody likes to say you need the athleticism, you need the cannon arm. And Goff doesn't really have either of those things. He's got a very good arm, but he doesn't have like elite arm talent, right? But you kind of look back at history and you're like, wait, maybe the 2 best quarterbacks ever were Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. They couldn't run, right? So like the mental side of things is the most important trait for a quarterback at the end of the day. And for Jared Goff to really push himself, have that first one in, last one in mentality, be the captain of this team, learn this offense, command this offense. We've seen Jared Goff climb as a quarterback in terms of how he ranks in the league. And even to this day, where I do have Jared Goff as a top 10 QB, just on the cusp of it, as the 10th ranking quarterback in this series for me, I still don't think the book is out on a 30-year-old Jared Goff to continue to get even better. And as you look at the discourse on Jared Goff, the idea that he actually might continue to get better here now into his 30s, he turns 31 in October, like week 6, but the idea that he actually might continue to get better often isn't brought up with Jared Goff. Generally speaking, I think people sort of take this, he is what he is mentality with him, that he's sort of maxed out as sort of this generic pocket passing QB without a ton of traits. And as a guy who doesn't really have the upside to be more of a tier 2 quarterback, for example. And I'm not going to play the hero either and necessarily predict that he ascends to that level either. Like, we use that green arrow on the graphics in this series to indicate those players who I genuinely expect to exceed the rating that I give them here. Or in other words, guys that I think have a better than not chance at doing so. And I don't think it's likely that Jared Goff turns into more than what I have him ranked now. Right now, as my 10th overall quarterback, a really good tier 3 QB, which by my definition is a QB worth paying that with the right pieces around him can be good enough to win a Super Bowl with. Just maybe a guy that isn't going to propel you to a Super Bowl if things aren't close to perfect. Like, that's where I do think Jared Goff is right now. But I do think the most fascinating conversation to have on Jared Goff is kind of against the consensus opinion on him that it's at least possible that he continues to climb and gets better as a QB. And honestly, in the last 2 years of his time here in Detroit, there's been stretches and moments where he's begun to kind of flirt with the idea for me of being more of that great tier 2 type of guy, more of that kind of top 8-ish range, more of where like Matthew Stafford was as a player that is of the caliber that, you know, he's going to more propel your team and you kind of expect to win the Super Bowl with that guy as your QB. He's had those stretches of play that have been at that level, but with us knowing the history of who he used to be, being a guy that is a little bit more limited in terms of physical traits, just as soon as I do these tier maker lists and stuff, and I'm now at a point where I feel really good about my QB tiers too. Like, there's been moments where I've wanted to push Jared Goff into that tier 2, but it feels like just as soon as I do that, or just as soon as I have those thoughts, that stinker game comes, or you want to see him have the playoff success here in Detroit as this version of Jared Goff, and the Commanders game happens, and he plays his worst game of the season, frankly, in the biggest of spots, and you're like, damn it, like, I want to see Jared Goff take that leap. He just hasn't done it yet, but again, he's just 30 years old. Like, there is room for him to continue getting better. Like, dude, Geno Smith broke out as a franchise-level QB at 34 years old. I think Kirk Cousins, around this age, really evolved mentally. Adding up that Rolodex of experience as a quarterback and reaching a certain level where you are just seeing the game at such an elite level, making the consistent right decisions on time with anticipation, closer to the level of like a Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. I'm not saying Jared Goff is going to go on and be those guys, but the same idea where processing and decision making are premium traits at the quarterback position, frankly, more important than athleticism and arm strength. And let's face it, the longer you stay in one place, yes, the coordinators are changing here, but the better chemistry you build with existing star playmakers like he has here, the more likely it is that a guy can actually develop elite level mental processing at this position in a way that other QBs, you know, we've seen this with like Russell Wilson, for example, other QBs, when they lose their legs, they lose a little bit of that arm talent, they actually regress. I think Jared Goff is the type of quarterback that actually could progress into his 30s. So I do find that fascinating. Again, I don't necessarily put the up arrow on him. I do still think there's a little bit of that lacking it factor that some of those, you know, true pocket passing elite QBs did have. I think the pocket presence on Jared Goff is probably a detractor in terms of consistently managing the rush. We have seen him consistently struggle more when interior pressure kicks up. And as we'll get to the offensive line here, that's a bit of a concern that he actually could play worse this season than he has in years past. So that's another reason why the up arrow maybe isn't on him, and maybe I should have just put the yellow arrow on him. I don't know. I think it's the most likely scenario is this is who he is a top 10 to 14 QB in the league. But it's still a little bit volatile in terms of just who Jared Goff is. And I do find that conversation the most fascinating way to discuss Jared Goff, especially as we head into this new season, coming off the heels of a very disappointing playoff performance and with a changing of coordinators here. So that is where we are at with Jared Goff, but I certainly do not think he's locked in necessarily as the 10th ranked quarterback, as we've discussed. But obviously, ranking at that level, we do view this as a good enough QB that if things go right with the rest of this roster and with the coaching staff, yeah, the Lions can absolutely win the Super Bowl. They were Super Bowl favorites last year, and if the defense didn't fall apart in the way that it did, things could have gone a lot differently last year, as we know. But it's not all excuses either. Jared Goff did not play well in that playoff game, and while this has been a generally positive conversation on him, you certainly don't want that to become the theme on Detroit, as you're hoping that they're going to be in those positions to, compete for Super Bowls and play playoff games every single year. But I think we're good at QB here. I don't really want to spend any time on Kyle Allen. If they have to go to Kyle Allen, they're in trouble. But let's turn the page to the group of pass catchers here, and we'll start by taking a look at the offseason changes. So some changes at wide receiver here. They say goodbye to Tim Patrick, who stepped in very nicely as a cheap veteran pickup. He could have made this team, but they wave him away and are electing to go with third-round rookie Isaac Tesla. I will say this, find someone that loves you the way the Detroit Lions love Isaac Tesla, and maybe the preseason hype is warranted. We'll continue to talk about him here in this conversation, but they trade 3 third-round picks to move up and take him in the third round and then back it up in the preseason by releasing Tim Patrick, who, in reality was going to be ahead of Tesla in that outside wide receiver role on the depth chart. The vote of confidence that this team has shown in the young kid, it's honestly, I respect it, man. And it's going to be exciting to see how that goes. But obviously, how that aggressive move works to try and replace Tim Patrick, who was a solid contributor to them last year, that's going to determine if they're better, worse, or if they stay the same at wide receiver. I don't think 7th round pick Dominique Lovett's going to play too much of a factor here. But at wide receiver, I said slightly downgraded, but also / to be determined. There's potential there with Tesla for sure. And then no change at tight end. They stay neutral there. But let's break this group of weapons down. These pass catchers are tremendous in Detroit. I rank them inside the top 5 for my weapons grade, where they rank 4th to 5th for me, which says a lot in a league where pretty much everybody has at least good weapons at this point in the modern NFL. But you gotta love how this group is constructed as well, not just with superstar talent, but with an excellent complementary group of skill sets as well, something I really preach in this series that teams should strive for, to build out your receiving core with the right skill sets to attack defenses in all of the different ways that receivers can. But you start, of course, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, bar none, the best slot wide receiver in the NFL. And I mean, he is maybe 2 tiers above the next guy down as far as true slot receivers are concerned. And typically with a slot wide receiver, even like in our last deep dive, for example, with like a Khalil Shakir, perfect example actually, where if your best wide receiver is your slot wide receiver, you're probably not putting yourself in the best position to succeed. But because Amon-Ra St. Brown is so dominant from the slot, that doesn't apply to Detroit. They are more than fine with him as their best wide receiver. And he's so good that as a true slot weapon, he's, the 6th or 7th best wide receiver in the league. And the only true slot guy that I would say that about. And just, man, like I said, he is so unbelievably dominant at this position in a way that nobody else is. He's an excellent route runner. He's got the reliable hands and all that stuff. But, while he isn't the fastest player, he has excellent acceleration to pull away from guys in short areas. But the combination of his physical strength at this position where, he is awesome after the catch, of course. He is a brick shithouse to get down for safeties and slot corners when he catches these balls over the middle of the field. His contact balance and his ability to just shrug guys off, fight for tough yardage. There are physical, strong slot wide receivers, and then there is Amon-Ra St. Brown. You know what I'm saying? He has that trait that some of these NFL athletes just do, where they play even so much stronger than their listed weight. And it's not 5'11", 202 pounds, where his listed at is light by any stretch of the imagination. But it's kind of like Aaron Donald, where you look at him on paper and he was 280 pounds, yet you couldn't move him off the ball, and he had some of the most incredible play strength of any player in the league. He has that, and his work ethic in the gym and to build his body to be such a rock, it's incredible and brings so much to this position. But that shows up as well in his ability to box guys out and win tough catches as a run blocker. It just contributes so much towards him being bar none, the best slot wide receiver in the NFL, and frankly has a chance at going down as the best true slot wide receiver of all time if he continues on this trajectory. So the utmost praise there. Now, of course, if he is going to be your best wide receiver and dominate from the slot in the way that he does, you do still want to build this out the right way and put the right skill sets around him to have more of that field stretching and perimeter threat on this team in a way that you wouldn't say about like a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or CeeDee Lamb and some of these other true number one wide receivers that can do both of those things, right? So the Lions understand that and have constructed this team in that way with Jameson Williams, who they take in the first round a few years ago. And he's been a little bit more of a, it's been a little bit more of a slow process to get him to this level. But last year, he certainly settled down as the perfect complement to Amon-Ra St. Brown and an outstanding contributor to this team. He's not the most well-rounded wide receiver in terms of ball skills and threatening to every level of the field, but again, you don't need that. You're funneling your passing game through Amon-Ra St. Brown and some of these other guys, and then mixing in the amazing things you can do with Jameson Williams, of course, as a vertical threat where he can give you those explosive plays, he can stack corners on the outside, he can outrun defenses on crossing routes and give you those huge chunk plays that have become such a staple of his game and this Lions offense as a whole. But even when he's not getting the ball, he is helping everybody else because teams are afraid of that big play threat. So it opens things up for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta in the short to intermediate game. It opens things up for Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's where you really talk about that complementary group of skill sets being so perfect here. There might, kind of similar to the Jared Goff conversation, there might still be another level to be unlocked by Jameson Williams where he can really take even further steps in his route running that have shown great improvement over the years. He could impress with his overall ball skills and, maybe with a Tim Patrick gone, we'll obviously see what happens with Tesla, but maybe Jameson Williams can develop more back shoulder chemistry and be more of that, he's never going to be an X wide receiver, but do some more of the X wide receiver role type of stuff. Maybe that happens, but I'm not necessarily predicting that it does or projecting that it does. But it's at least worth noting that he has continued to get better, and maybe that continues. But if he is what he was last year, and as we've described, that's the perfect number 2 complement to Amon-Ra. My only other note on Jameson Williams, something to keep an eye on this year, is I have been so impressed with how Ben Johnson has been able to tap into his skill set, and it will be interesting to see if they can keep that up. I think the way that they use pre-snap motion to kind of scheme him open, where I don't think he is great against press coverage as well, is another aspect of being a more complete wide receiver that he's maybe lacking. And again, he can continue to get better at that as well, of course, but the way that they're able to scheme him open with pre-snap motion or even just formationally to kind of hide him in condensed formations, but the way they've gotten creative just to get him the ball on jet sweeps and whatever it might be, and then just knowing when to press that deep ball button as well. There is a kind of timing aspect of it as well to kind of set those deep shots up. Ben Johnson's been excellent at getting into using Jameson Williams, and they're going to have to continue that they can prove to do that. So that's obviously more of a coaching note to circle back to that conversation, not really a talent question on Jameson Williams. I think he's really settled down after a rockier start to his career as an awesome number 2. And then before we get to Tesla and talk about the rest of these wide receivers, I want to focus on like their core contributors here. It's really kind of like a 4-pronged approach of just awesome playmakers. And I want to talk about Sam Laporta next. He fits in perfectly here as well. And something that they do so well scheme-wise here is so many of their passing concepts under Ben Johnson, and again, I think it'll be pretty similar here with the new staff, but so many of their drop-back passing concepts are those middle-of-the-field leveling concepts where it's basically either Y-cross or some variant of that general idea where you're going to have Goff reading the intermediate middle part of the field where he's at his best, and you're either going to have Sam Laporta running a maybe crossing route or a shallow hitch route, and Amon-Ra St. Brown running either a dig or a deeper cross or more of an intermediate hitch route at the second level, and basically forcing those intermediate zone defenders into a bind where they can't take both of those things away. Or that can be flipped, where it's Amon-Ra running the shallow stuff and Sam Laporta running the intermediate stuff. That's where my mind goes to first with where Laporta's at his best and how much he brings to this offense, because you obviously need both of those guys to be great at both of those types of routes if you're going to make that such a core concept of what this team does. And Laporta is. He's obviously reliable and awesome underneath, but he does run great routes on those intermediate dig routes, and he's got the acceleration like an Amon-Ra St. Brown has, not quite to the same level, but he's got enough from the tight end position to get into that space quickly. A lot of tight ends take a long time to get into those intermediate digs because they don't have the juice or route running to do it. And by the time the quarterback needs to make that throw, he's getting sacked or hit while he's thrown. Well, Laporta can get there on time, and it brings that whole offense together. And then what Jared Goff and this Lions offense have really leaned into is the idea of if it's 3rd and 10 and they're going to take away that intermediate part of the field, no problem. We will throw the ball to Sam Laporta or Amon-Ra St. Brown on that shallow cross or on that intermediate stick route, whatever it might be in that concept. We'll throw it short of the sticks on 3rd down. There's a pretty good chance with both these guys being as good after the catch as they are. There's a pretty good chance that they're actually going to fight for 2 extra yards or break a tackle or turn up field and get the first down anyway. But if they don't, they're going to set up 4th and 1, 4th and 2, where we know this team is not afraid to go for it. And under Ben Johnson, again, coaching staff, wild card. We'll see how good they are at it. Again, all of that, it keeps coming back to that. But we know that's when those trick plays and Ben Johnson's creativity have been such a difference maker for this team, where teams might sell out to stop the run on 4th and 1, and they get explosive plays out of 4th and 1 sometimes. So that's been the entire image with really Amon-Ra and Laporta and those two skill sets working together. And in the case of Laporta, I do put the up arrow on him. I think, anybody you ask will say he wasn't as good last year as he was as a rookie. But I think we took for granted just how rare it was that Laporta was as good as a rookie tight end as he was. Most tight ends take 2, 3, 4 years to become even what Laporta has been to this day. But I definitely think there's room for him to be even a larger part of this offense and develop even better chemistry with Jared Goff, become a little bit better of a blocker as well. I think this is a nice 3rd year for him to show that there's even another step to be taken from Laporta. Not that needs to happen by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's possible. Whereas right now he's, probably top 5 to 7 tight ends in the league. Can he become more of a bona fide top 3, top 4 guy? I think that's possible. And then, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs. He's going to get his love in the running back portion of this, but he is obviously a factor in the passing game as well with his juice. I feel like that kind of speaks for itself. I didn't end up putting the up arrow on Jahmyr Gibbs, but does it not feel like there's even more to be unlocked there as a route runner, causing formational problems, putting him out wide as a wide receiver? He did get 83 registered snaps as a pre-snap wide out. But just like having watched all the Lions games, it does feel like a lot of that is just kind of like from those bunch formations when they put him in motion and then, do that kind of stuff with him. I feel like there's even more to be unlocked there. I want to hear from Lions fans your thoughts on that. And with John Morton having spent so much time with Sean Payton, who has always had that receiving back, whether it's, Darren Sproles, Alvin Kamara, that's actually an area that if there's anything to be critical of Ben Johnson on, and it sounds crazy to even say this with how much we think of Ben Johnson and how good Jahmyr Gibbs has been, when they drafted him, it was like, he's our offensive weapon, right? He's going to be our Christian McCaffrey. We're going to do so many different things. He's more than just a running back. He's a receiver as well. They haven't really done that yet, I don't think, at least in my opinion. Again, I didn't put the up arrow on him, but man, there's only one running back that I have given that true, purple-coated elite impact as a receiving weapon for your passing game, and that is Christian McCaffrey because of how they use him. Where when he's out there, And you can put him out there in personnel with David Montgomery as well, where when they're in the huddle together, you don't really know if you're going to get like pony personnel or if Jahmyr Gibbs is just going to line up as a wide receiver. Now, it's a little harder because they have Amon-Ra St. Brown as that elite slot guy, whereas the Niners can just put Christian McCaffrey in the slot and do some of that stuff. So I understand it's a little bit more muddy with Amon-Ra there. But it's at least a note. I think usage-wise, you could do even more with Jahmyr Gibbs. Not that they need to. He's awesome in this sense. And that's really your supercharged group there of dynamic weapons that all play off of each other so well. But the only other kind of lacking skill set is that physical perimeter wide receiver, that Tim Patrick role, the Josh Reynolds role in this offense, where they're not going to be the focal point of the offense, but if you need a guy to run a back shoulder or a hitch or win a tough catch in a critical situation, if defenses are finding ways to take away everybody else, that's been another underrated pocket of this group of weapons, is having those guys like Reynolds and Patrick that have mostly been pretty good. Can Isaac TeSlaa step into that role as a big unknown of a prospect? I mean, this was a shock in the draft, right? When the Lions didn't just take TeSlaa in the third round, they gave up 2 extra third-round picks. So they have spent 3 third-round picks to acquire this player that, by reports, other teams were interested in taking him in this range. But if you value like the consensus draft rankings and stuff, you know, he was a day 3 prospect, an interesting day 3 prospect, but it was just aggressive to go get this player, and they've earned the benefit of the doubt as a drafting team. And I've certainly learned, go against Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell at your own risk, but I will call it out. Like, man, that's a lot for Isaac TeSlaa, who didn't really produce in college. He was used as a big slot wide receiver at Arkansas, but it is the classic case of what can you do versus what were you asked to do. The Lions are going to ask him to be more of an outside wide receiver here, to beat press, to run digs, to win those tough catches on the perimeter. Why he wasn't able to really show that in his 5 years of college ball, that's a legitimate question, I think. But from a traits-based evaluation, I do get it. Like, he's 6'4", he's got great speed, he's an amazing tester. He had good, strong hands at Arkansas. Worth betting on that in a larger, workload, that you get to showcase that even more. And man, I don't think there's a more hyped up player coming out of the preseason than Isaac TeSlaa. And again, the fact that they just said, we're so confident we're going to release Tim Patrick and we're good to go with TeSlaa, it's exciting, man. And as skeptical as I was of the draft pick, I am, interested to say the least. And I know Lions fans aren't going to really let me jump on the bandwagon at this point, but I've started to believe that this is going to work out, man. He looks good. He looks fun. So we'll see where it goes. Certainly questionable as a prospect, but you can't deny the potential there. And the beauty is, again, they don't necessarily need him. It's just, if he doesn't work out, you're kind of missing that reliable 5th target in this option that Tim Patrick was. But there is, by the way, maybe another player on the practice squad that could be that guy in Jackson Meeks. Let's just talk about Meeks now. There's obviously a couple other players that actually made this team, but if you're talking about if TeSlaa does happen to bust, who on the current Detroit Lions might be able to do that for them this year, they could obviously go out and find a guy on a trade or free agent. Like, they could probably get Tim Patrick back if they really wanted to, right? Throw a 6th-round pick to Jacksonville, I think, signed him. But, dude, I loved Jackson Meeks a lot. A lot of Michael Wilson in his game, for those that have watched him with the Cardinals, where he doesn't have that top speed that you get excited about from a wide receiver, but in terms of beating press coverage, in a way that TeSlaa hasn't shown from his college tape, Jackson Meeks had some of the best release technique paired with excellent agility and foot quickness, and even the strength in his arms. And, it's part of beating press is using those arms and displacing corners with your upper body as much as separating with your lower half as well. But anyway, excellent technique in release, route running, really tough at the catch point, after the catch, savvy player. Did have some frustrating drops, was the main knock on him for being more of a bigger bodied, physical build wide receiver. You don't want to see the drops in there. But man, his production at Syracuse in a really good offense. I mean, he was a huge part of that Syracuse team having the amazing season that they did. The NFL overthought this, in my opinion, and I get it. He didn't end up making this Lions team. He could have beat out the guy that they actually drafted in Dominique Levet. Probably came down to special teams contributions and a roster pinch, but I'm just saying, don't sleep on Jackson Meeks eventually becoming a contributor for this Lions team. Maybe even if that is just as a really nice wide receiver 4. If you get that as an undrafted free agent, that's excellent work by the Detroit Lions. So I got to give Jackson Meeks some love, and it's always a risk when you do that with an undrafted free agent that ends up on the practice squad, but I will certainly call my shot with him. Beyond that, though, you do have Khalif Raymond, who's a nice backup to have here if anything were to happen to St. Brown or Jamison Williams. He can start in the slot and be a solid, capable starter there. And if Jamison goes down, he's got the speed to step outside and be a vertical threat there. He's also an awesome return man. So he's a huge asset to this team in terms of depth and special teams. And then Dominique Levet, honestly not too familiar with his game. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being, someone they really like for special teams. Just kind of an undersized guy that had a lack of standout production at Georgia. But yeah, there's your wide receivers. And then as far as tight end depth, I love Brock Wright as a big, 12 personnel tight end. He's one of the better blocking tight ends in the league, in my opinion. And he's flashed as a receiving threat. They just don't really have the targets to go around for him to really develop and emerge as more of a presence in the receiving game. But like I said, this team runs the third most 12 personnel in the league. Brock Wright is a quasi-starter for this offense, but more from a blocking angle. And then Shane Zylstra as well makes it as their tight end 3. And then in terms of the running backs, David Montgomery will get out there because he's just a way better pass protector than Jahmyr Gibbs. And he's also great on dump downs as well in the check and release and check down game. So you got a pair of contributors there out of the backfield between Gibbs and Montgomery. It's just such a complete, awesome unit, as we know with Detroit. These have become household names. I probably didn't even need to spend as much time on them as I did, but certainly worth celebrating what they've established with this group, and it's a core identity of how the Lions rank third in these power rankings at the end of the day. So I guess I'm glad we gave them their love. But let's go to the backfield with a lens on the run game. As far as offseason changes, nothing. They're running it back with Gibbs and Montgomery and Craig Reynolds. And, I mean, there's not a ton to say about this Lions backfield. It's been up there in terms of NFL storylines over the last couple of years, is this duo, this true thunder and lightning approach with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Bar none, the best running back duo in the league. And, these guys individually, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think is anywhere from the 4th to 7th best running back in the league, a true superstar. It just comes down to how healthy is Christian McCaffrey, what is Ashton Jinty going to be, and then stylistic preference, in my opinion, between Gibbs and Jacobs for Green Bay. Very different runners there. But the Lions have obviously proved themselves to be right to end up taking him where they did, 12th in the draft. I was critical of it. I was dead wrong. I basically said, look, my high-end pro comp on Jahmyr Gibbs is Jamal Charles. My low-end comp is Aaron Jones. If he's just Aaron Jones, that still probably wouldn't have been worth the 12th pick. But if he can be Jamal Charles, yeah, that's going to be worth it. And he's been Jamal Charles, where we knew he was fast, but he really needed to have, again, to be worth that 12th overall pick, you needed to see a guy that, his combination of speed and acceleration is just so much better than any other back in the league that he's just a constant threat. And that's what he's been. And of course, the big play threat ability is super important. All these teams are looking for those explosive plays, those 20-plus yard gains. Anytime he touches the ball, he's a threat to do that. But because he does have the best acceleration of any back in the league, he's able to generate so much force at the tackle point where he breaks a lot of tackles in the hole in a way that I didn't necessarily know that was going to be a part of his game coming out of college. But the fact that he can run with some power because of that acceleration, even if he isn't that big, that's made the world of difference, and how he is, in the conversation for the top 5 backs in the league. And they've started to lean more and more and more into him, not just as an outside zone and a gadget threat as we maybe saw initially, but it's been a lot more early down work and a larger part of this split going to Jahmyr Gibbs. It's faded away from being 60% Montgomery, 40% Gibbs. It's now kind of flipped over. And again, because of Gibbs's ability to prove his contact balance and ability to break tackles and run in short yardage situations, plus his improvements with his vision that have gotten better in his time in Detroit here, because they do ask him to run like every concept in the book. It's a lot to put on a young back. Montgomery was ready to handle that when Gibbs was a rookie, but Gibbs can see it all out now. So bona fide superstar, Jahmyr Gibbs. And then David Montgomery himself is probably a top 20 running back in the league, which speaks to how good this backfield is. He would be, a lead bell cow back for so many teams in the league, I think. Unbelievable contact balance, great vision, good acceleration himself. More of that bowling ball of needles style back, just awesome, man. And the only question on him is if he's starting to get to that point in a running back's timeline that it does happen for everybody. It's not that he's old by age, but because of his running style, because of his career workload going all the way back to Iowa State, we've seen that about that 2,000 career touch mark can prove to be a problem for some guys. And that's right where Montgomery is. He had 600 plus carries at Iowa State, has now seen about 1,400 carries at the NFL ranks. We did see him get that knee injury last year, and that was just a part of the injury equation for this team. Obviously, Gibbs can do a lot, but there's an aspect that David Montgomery brings to the table that complements what Jahmyr Gibbs isn't necessarily elite at, and that was a loss for them, in my opinion. And they tried to force him back. I was pretty critical of them for doing that because I just felt like the odds of him coming back and being an impact on what was supposed to be a season-ending knee injury, the risk-reward there didn't add up for me when the risk is, forcing him back, not getting a full recovery and getting him ready for, a 2025 season. So I love David Montgomery. I don't necessarily expect regression, but it is something I'm kind of cautious about and a little bit worried about. And I didn't really know how to play it in terms of the graphics. Like, do I put the red arrow to project regression on him? That's not quite my take on it. I don't really consider him an injury-prone player necessarily. He's not a yellow up or down arrow. I'm still going to rank him pretty high. I don't think there's the upside for him to be better than I rated him. Really, all I felt was appropriate was just to put the wild card icon on him. Can he get back to his full speed and be the David Montgomery we know and love? I really hope so. I think it's likely that happens, but there is at least a world where it's time for David Montgomery and the Lions lose a little bit of that thunder to Jahmyr Gibbs' lightning, which it's not the end of the world, but that's been yet another boon for this, Lions offense that's stolen the show over the last couple of years. You catch what I'm putting down there? And another reason that's a concern is, you don't really have the backup to get excited about here. Look, they love Craig Reynolds. I get it. He fits the culture. He's kind of I don't want to say he's the heartbeat of this team, but he really just embodies the kneecap-biting mentality, the chip on your shoulder approach. But he's one of the least physically talented running backs that are actively rostered. So he kind of is what he is there. Just doesn't give you that same impact that Montgomery does. As that Thunder approach. And then Sion Vaki is interesting, kind of that DB / running back coming out of college, still very much kind of in development within this offense. They love him for special teams and for trick plays and stuff. Still technically potential for him to be maybe like a third down presence, but that's tough when you have Jahmyr Gibbs, right? So there is your tremendous 4th ranking Lions backfield there. Let's get to the offensive line here. And this offseason is definitely going to bring some question marks. I think it's fair to say and should be expected that from a roster perspective, this offensive line is going to be the biggest question mark for Detroit. And I do have them downgraded on the offensive line. They lose not just Frank Ragnow to, I don't know if it was unexpected, but certainly an early retirement. Absolute legend, but the dude has taken a beating over his career. I understand why he wants to kind of quit while he's ahead, if you will. But not just that, they lose Kevin Zeitler, older offensive lineman, but he was still awesome for this team last year. So those are huge losses. You're saying goodbye to one of the better center guard combos that we saw in the league last year. And in terms of filling those shoes, You're going with some of the developmental existing talent that they have, and Tate Ratledge, a second-round pick out of Georgia. And that's really it. I mean, Miles Frazier is a developmental tackle they took in the 5th round that's going to start the season on the pup. So definitely from a roster perspective, downgraded on the offensive line. And as we take a look at this unit, that's inevitably going to lead to some, massive question marks here and make this the biggest wild card unit for this roster for Detroit. Now, when you still have an elite tackle duo with Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker, I think outside of Philadelphia, this is the best tackle duo in the league. When you have that good of a tackle duo in a league where there's just not a lot of great offensive lines, like they're still going to rank out quite favorably. They actually come out as my 4th ranking offensive line. Now, they do come in 11th to 12th for pass blocking, but 2nd in run blocking. And I will stand by those rankings. But it's a kind of touchy conversation because I could see this offensive line actually being more of an issue for this team, and certainly not looking back on the story of the Detroit Lions and feeling like this was the 4th ranked offensive line. You know what I'm saying? So that's where that wild card comes from. This certainly could be worse, but there's also like a lot of hope and potential for these young guards to be just fine, and this to again be an elite force. But it certainly is tough to know kind of where they're going to land, especially with the Ragnow retirement and losing another good guard in Zeitler. But let's get into it. The tackle duo. I'm gonna save a little bit of time here, not to gloss over these guys when they are doing really all of the heavy lifting for this 4th ranked unit here. But Penei Sewell, elite of the elite tackles in the league. Him and Lane Johnson. You're splitting hairs for who's the best right tackle, and honestly, could argue if either of those guys are the best overall tackle in the league. The best run blocker in the game today, full stop, with Trent Williams at 38 years old now. He is just a built in a lab beast for run blocking, and he brings the tenacity on top of that, and now the full technique and understanding of the run game to be a damn near flawless run blocker. And his presence alone is how Detroit really ranks as high as they do. He makes that big of an impact, in my opinion. It's similar to what we've seen with those Niners run blocking grades over the years, where it's like you look at the rest of the group and they're okay, they're solid, but you got Trent Williams, and he is such a difference maker with his ability to pave the way up front that it just propels the group forward. Now, as a pass blocker, I think he's still slowly developing there. He's a very good pass protector, but he does take some losses. Not anything you're worried about there. He's very, very good there. And then you have Taylor Decker opposite of him. Excellent left tackle. Better in pass pro than run blocking, but very good at both. If there's any question about him, it's that he has missed some time over the years. Not a lot of time, but some time, and he's 31 years old. I'm not projecting regression. I'm not projecting him to get hurt. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind there. But how things go for this offensive line and really this offense are going to depend on what happens with the interior. This is a much more fascinating conversation than that tackle duo to me. You got your veteran Graham Glasgow sliding back into center, where he's certainly done a lot of that throughout his career. It's not the transition to center that you're worried about. It's the fact that he had a really bad year last year in pass protection, worse than he had played in years before. He's getting older, and he doesn't have the help of having Frank Ragnow next to him anymore. Counting on him to be your best interior offensive lineman is a big risk for Detroit. From a run blocking angle, I'm definitely not too worried about it, but it is like the pass pro. He's going to get some help with double teams and stuff, but they're double teams from effectively 2 rookies here with Mahogany and Ratledge. But if teams are able to isolate him one-on-one, what we saw last year is certainly concerning. So it's not a great starting point for your interior offensive line, but I guess you could do worse. But knowing where he's going to land as in my opinion, a regressing veteran is shaky. And then you have just 2 totally unproven rookie guards. Well, Mahogany in year 2, but he's only started 1 game in his career. And Tate Ratledge is a rookie second rounder. I like both these prospects a lot. And the Lions have earned a lot of benefit of the doubt to develop this group. We were praising offensive line coaches in our last deep dive, and Hank Fraley absolutely should have been mentioned as one of the better offensive line coaches in the league. So there's plenty of reason to be excited that these guys can actually settle in, and if they do, all right, you're kind of back locked and loaded with this offensive line. I know we have this kind of scary overtone with it where things could go wrong here, but look, the reality is things could go very right here as well. Mahogany as a prospect coming out of Boston College was super athletic, great run blocking tape, a lot of the flashes you look for in pass pro, but just needs to clean some stuff up. I definitely thought was a day 2 caliber prospect that fell because of some injury concerns. And, he was mostly unavailable last year. Forgive me for not prepping notes on it, but I think it was more of like was he a mono, or like he was sick, or like Lions fans fill us in the comments down below. I don't think it was related to like injury concerns, but his availability in general has been shaky. I think he's going to be good to go here though, and he did start in that divisional playoff game against Washington. The offensive line had some struggles, but it actually was not from Christian Mahogany there. And forgive me, I said he has 1 career start earlier. He actually has 2. He started week 16 as well against Chicago and played very well in that game too. So you're looking at 2 career starts where he's played really well, but a 6th-round pick that is entirely unproven. He has like Pro Bowl potential. There's a chance that he is just awesome and easily replaces what they had in Kevin Zeitler, and they're ready to go. Like I'm honestly more optimistic about Christian Mahogany than I am about Tate Ratledge, though there's reason to believe in Tate Ratledge as well. I can't come out and rank him too high. That's our process in this series. I think some of my optimism does flow through to the overall offensive line rankings there. Again, we do still have this as our 4th overall offensive line, but big question mark there with Mahogany, and then, in my opinion, an even bigger question mark in Tate Ratledge. 1 less year of NFL development here that Mahogany did get last year. We have at least seen Mahogany come out against NFL competition in a couple games and look really good. Ratledge has the higher draft capital, but there's some stuff that he's going to have to get better at and get better at quickly as he gets right into the NFL level here. I liked a lot of stuff from him. I think he's really athletic. He's got that like kneecap biting dickhead mentality that they look for with these offensive linemen. I think it's admirable that they at least tried him at center for a lot of camp. That's a testament to his smarts, and I think that experience there will at least help him as a rookie, like in terms of picking up stunts and a lot of the stuff that rookie linemen do struggle with. That's, maybe being optimistic there, but he is a guy that played with pretty high pad level and is a taller guard. He fell off some blocks in the run game and kind of struggled to anchor at times in pass pro too. So like there certainly it wasn't all perfect with him, but I understand why they like him, why they spent a 2nd-round pick on him. He was a 3rd-round guy for me, but end of the 2nd round, that's fair play at a guard position that, it's hard to find these guys in the draft, so go get your guy. It's not like he was going to be there when the Lions were picking later and they wanted to go aggressive to go get Tesla, which they needed him too. So I have no complaints about kind of how they drafted him, where they drafted him. It's just like, we got to see what it looks like at the NFL level as a rookie. Was probably a guy that ideally you would more sit for a year and then get him ready for year 2, but they're asking a lot of him. So not to beat a dead horse here, but we'll see where it goes with that interior trio. Not a ton of depth worth noting. I think offensive line depth is a potential problem for this team. If they start to get injuries, that's where things could go off the rails too. A lot of teams have more like reliable backups than what we're looking at here with Detroit. Definitely fascinated in Giovanni Manu. They were aggressive to make him a 4th-round pick a couple years ago, kind of with the idea that he is their Jordan Mailata-esque project, someone that just international, hasn't played a lot of football, give him a good O-line coach with tremendous traits. They're, I think, still hoping he can be Taylor Decker's long-term replacement, and if Decker were to get hurt, I'd be curious to see what Manu looks like. I have yet to watch him play a snap of football, and that's my fault. I'm sure he's played in the preseason, and I would love to hear from Lions fans kind of how he's looked in the preseason. Just don't have a ton of time to grind preseason tape, you guys, as I get through these deep dives here in August. But, I'm fascinated. DeMarco Jones, not so much fascinated there. And then guard and center depth is definitely a question as well. You got Kingsley Agwakin. Wasn't a huge fan of him coming out. Coyote Awasika is very developmental. Miles Frazier played tackle at LSU. I like him as a guard convert. I think that's his natural position. He's going to start the season on the PUP, so that's not an ideal way to start his career. But, he was a good secondary pick to these question marks at guard. Like, okay, we like Ratledge, we like Mahogany, but if they don't work out, maybe Miles Frazier can. I had Frazier as a 3rd to 4th round grade as well. Thought he was a value where they got him. So certainly not predicting that it happens, but wouldn't be anything close to a surprise if he ended up being a quality starter for them someday. And maybe eventually Ratledge is their center of the future after he got some reps there this camp. And then if they like what they have in Frazier, maybe you do have a really exciting trio of cheap young guards there. Potential's through the roof, but downsides there as well. I think we get the point there on the offensive line. It is the biggest wild card for this team, bar none. But even with that said, it's not enough to truly hold back this Lions offense from getting favorable rankings. They come out as my 4th overall offense, 3rd in run game, and 7th in passing game. And those rankings, those splits, probably not too big of a surprise for anybody that's watched this Lions team. But it is worth noting that with some of those added questions with coordinators and a new look offensive line, this was the 2nd offense in DVOA last year, even closer to elite of the elite. A little bit of a step back from that. Still expecting this offense to be very, very good, but they got to hit some of those green lights if they want to get back to where they were offensively last year. Though they're a little bit more protected as we talk about the defense now, I think, because they had to be like absolute elite of the offenses last year. If they do take a slight step back on that side of the ball without Ben Johnson, without some of those offensive linemen, well, they're getting a lot back defensively here and could be much more dependable on this side of the ball so that they don't have to win all these big games 35-32, which it kind of felt like with them last season. So let's get into it, starting with the defensive line. And we take a look at their offseason changes here. Good bit of kind of movement here, but it's mostly really injury related. So on the interior of the defensive line, they actually lose Levi Onwuzurike, who they did bring back. I was surprised the league didn't want to give him a bigger deal because he kind of broke through as an impact last year. He's a loss. He goes down, I think, torn ACL in camp, so he's going to miss the season. That's a blow for this team, especially because Ali McNeil, as we'll talk about, isn't quite ready for the start of the season. Definitely relevant when you're looking at, Packers week 1, Ravens week 3, their big addition being a rookie in Tyleik Williams here. The timing of it all is certainly quite unfortunate yet again for Detroit. But I do like, obviously, the Tyleik Williams pick in round 1. And then they did sign Roy Lopez, nice addition. I said slightly upgraded. I think there's plenty of reason to believe Tyleik Williams can be at least a little bit better than Levi was. Because it's not like Levi was some superstar or anything like that, but could also argue to be determined, right? There's no guarantee that Tyleik is good, but I think you can say slightly upgraded there, knowing that especially, Lee McNeil should be back before too long here, as we'll discuss. But on the edge, obviously, massively upgraded here, getting Aiden Hutchinson back. That alone is going to make any unit upgraded with what he was doing last year. Goes down week 5, only played 24% of their snaps. That's a huge return for them, no doubt. Marcus Davenport technically back currently. We'll see how long that lasts. But they are losing Zadarius Smith. Technically still out there to be brought back. Wouldn't be surprised if we drop this deep dive and we find out they signed Zadarius Smith. We'll love that for them, by the way. Wouldn't really change their power ranking or anything like that, but would make me feel even better about this D-line. Kind of expecting that happens, honestly, as a reaction to the Packers adding Micah Parsons. So at least we'll cover our bases there. But yeah, they needless to say, should be in a better position with this defensive line, but that's not to say there aren't question marks here. There's a lot of kind of moving pieces with injuries and a rookie coming in here to help out as well. Tough group to rank, frankly. Right now, I have them coming out as my 6th overall defensive line, 11th in pass rush, and as good as it gets for D-line run defense in the league today. They rank tied for first with 2 other teams there. But all of these defensive line ratings that I gave this team, I did kind of ding them down a little bit just because of all the injury stuff going on here. If you could guarantee health on this unit and guarantee full recoveries on Aiden Hutchinson and Ali McNeil, Hutchinson I'm much less worried about than McNeil, but if you could guarantee full force, full recovery, even all the way down to Marcus Davenport and Josh Paschal, the D-line rankings would be even better. But it goes to show you, it's still a very good D-line. You're still really optimistic about this group, even if you've got some injury questions. But let's get into the edge group first. So you bring Aiden Hutchinson back. He basically would have sealed Defensive Player of the Year by week 10 if he didn't get hurt when he did last year. The only negative thing I have to say, and then we'll just praise Aiden Hutchinson for a little bit, is that he did eat against backup tackles last year. Like, he wasn't going to keep up that rate and finishes the year with, 150 pressures and 30 sacks like he would have. Like, he was just detonating backup tackles against Seattle, and the Rams were going with backup tackles week 1. Tampa had backup tackles week 2. But that's not to say I don't view Aiden Hutchinson as an elite edge rusher, because he was starting to flirt with that elite conversation in 2023 with the year he had. It's like, okay, this is like one of those dudes, one of those defensive player type tier 1 edge rushers. Let's see it for another year. And then he comes out and does what he does, and it's like, okay, I mean, I don't need to question this anymore. It's just unfortunate we didn't get to see a full second season of it. And with that, you could argue, like, he could even have the up arrow on him where he does fully climb up to those, like, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa ratings, so to speak. I've got a 92 overall rating on him. We'll see if he can do that. But that's minutia, right? Like, this is a math-changing, dominant edge rusher. We've seen that now. He also contributes against the run, by the way, but just the complete package as a rusher. He's shown that he can rush with power, which puts the fear of God in any edge rusher. He can win with speed and bend around the corner, and he's got an excellent combination of pass rushing moves to beat both shoulders. He can win with maybe the best inside spin move in the league. He's great with his hands on swipes. Like, this dude is a pass rushing clinic, and getting this guy back obviously means the world, not just for this D line, but for this defense. And that speaks for itself. And I do think, he was flirting with, like, coming back in the playoffs last year. All reports are like, look, fluke injury. He has been dominant in camp, and they are locked and loaded with him. So I'm really not worried about his recovery as I am with some of these other guys. But yeah, as we talk about the rest of this defensive line, there's a lot of question marks. So honestly, like, the edge group is such a non-factor other than Aiden Hutchinson. I want to just kind of go down the pecking order of talent with this team. And you're obviously hoping that Aleem McNeil can make a swift recovery to get back out there sooner rather than later, and resume as a quality number 2 player. And that sounds like you're underselling it. I'm talking about, like, legit, you're happy with him as your number 2. Because there are teams where Aleem McNeil would be the best player on your defensive line. But that true kind of Robin to Aiden Hutchinson's Batman. And that's what Aleem McNeil really played at that level last year. He's broken through as an awesome 3-down defensive tackle, stops the run, wins with power, wins with finesse as a rusher. And there was times before he got hurt last year even that, they were surviving as a defensive line with him having to be their best player. It wasn't necessarily ideal, like I said, but he's going to start the season on the pup, bouncing back from an ACL tear. There's no guarantee that he can get back to full speed. It's different for everybody. Not every ACL tear is created equal. Some guys just come back and resume where they were. Some guys take a year. Some guys are never the same. So we need to see how he recovers. And if he does make a full recovery, that's going to obviously be a game changer for this defensive line and would lead towards this Lions pass rush being more top 10 and this D-line being one of the best in the league. It's already up there, but, top 2, top 3, top 4, that kind of thing. Aleem McNeil's return is basically the main thing you're focused on as far as that conversation's concerned. But yeah, you got some other question marks here as well. You have DJ Reader getting older, showed some regression last year. Certainly not what he was in his prime in Cincinnati, but you're still happy to have him. He's going to be a nice piece like early in the season that you can hopefully lean on him a little bit more early. With Aleem McNeil missing some, the first 4 games, guaranteed being on the PUP list there. And then hopefully as the season goes on, Tyleik Williams, who we'll talk about, settles in more as a rookie. Aleem McNeil comes back, and then Reader can take more of a seat as just like, tell me when you need me. I'll come in and help you. And then hopefully you can get the best version of Aleem McNeil in the of DJ Reader in the playoffs when you really need him. So it's a pretty solid setup there. I still love DJ Reader. It's just he's getting older. He's not quite as dominant of a force as he once was. But yeah, you got Tyleik Williams as well, 1st-round draft pick. And he's definitely their long-term replacement for DJ Reader, right? And they're going to roll forward with McNeil and Williams. There's a lot of DJ Reader in Tyleik Williams, though it would be kind of a best-case scenario if Tyleik can prove to be the pass-rushing player that DJ Reader was throughout his career. You know, at this age, Reader's not too much of a pass rushing presence, but in his prime, like, Reader was one of the rare nose tackles that wasn't just a dominant run defender, which he was, but could actually push the pocket and be a solid, like, kind of maybe third best pass rusher on our defensive line. That's pretty far away from Tyleik Williams. Like, he just doesn't have the best first step or really a ton of, like, ability to win as a rusher. There were some flashes in there, and maybe that can come along. You certainly wouldn't have said of DJ Reader as a prospect that he was going to be the player that he was, right? So, like, again, best case scenario pass rush wise, but the run defense, you feel real good about him. Broke out in that final year at Ohio State, can take on double teams, 330-pound dude. Excellent strength at the point of the attack to block, to shed blocks. So it's tough, you know, for rookie DTs to step in and be dominant impacts. This has kind of been the position where it's like, man, it's really hard to find true impacts at this position as rookies. I mean, even guys like Quinnen Williams had some struggles early on, but, you know, like, we've seen what happened with like Mazi Smith being a complete bust. Been a little bit more hit or miss at this position. So you're optimistic that Tyleik Williams is going to be an impact and not Mazi Smith, but he's got to prove it for sure. And then he can kind of kick back out to the edge with Marcus Davenport, which, for those looking at the graphic there, I know it's kind of ill humor, and I don't even feel good about putting an image of a literal hospital on there for his player card. But it's more just like to indicate, like, do they really have Marcus Davenport? Like, should we really put a lot of emphasis on him being a part of this defensive line? It's more of just like, look, let's face the reality of this. Going back to his time in New Orleans, he was constantly missing time. He signs with Minnesota in 2023, and we're like, I mean, fun signing on paper, but the guy's always hurt. Davenport misses week 1, and then comes back for a couple games in 2023, and then he's done for the season. Then Detroit signs him, and it's like, fun signing on paper, but is he really there? He plays week 1, week 3, done for the season. And even when he has played in those last 2 years, he hasn't really been too much of an impact. He was great week 1 for this Lions team against those backup tackles for the Rams that we talked about how much Aiden Hutchinson wrecked that game. That's really the only good game he's had in the last 2 seasons. 29 years old now, and obviously the dude just has taken a physical beating. And when you're talking about a guy that was really a traits-based bull rusher, if you're losing some of that twitch, it's not like he's got a bunch of technique to hang his hat on. We've seen his run defense grades fall off in this time too. It's just like, how much time do we really want to spend on Marcus Davenport here, who's on a 1-year, $2.5 million contract that only the Lions were really the only team willing to roll the dice on him? Theoretically, yeah, there's upside in there, and if you want to play the optimist, he's there right now. And I think any good-natured human is going to say, well, he's just been really unlucky, and that's going to change. I don't know that that's really the case with Davenport. This reminds me of like Jason Verrett, where we spent like 4 years saying, oh, they get Jason Verrett back, and it just never happened. But the crazy thing is, like, as we sit here now in week 1, he's like their only edge guy that they can play in week 1. And at least we're going to find out like how much juice he has left week 1. But Josh Pascal's on the non-football injury list. He's not going to be ready right away. As we sit here in this recording, no Zadarius Smith. Again, I think that is going to change before they play the Packers. That just makes too much sense for them to bring him back. And again, if that happens, these rankings come up a little bit. Zadarius Smith can still rush the passer, especially. I've accounted for that, you know, going into this deep dive. Like, it wouldn't raise Detroit up in the overall power rankings, but it would just help things certainly here, as you would expect. But, like, okay, who else is going to play other than Marcus Davenport? Al-Qadim Muhammad, yeah, he's a rotational early down edge guy. He's fine. But he is what he is. And then you got Tyrus Wheat. I mean, maybe they found some gem out of Dallas, but he hasn't played well when he's been in Dallas. And that's their edge room. You're probably talking about taking someone like a Patrick O'Connell or a Mekhi Wingo or Tyler Lacey and playing them as a heavy-handed 5 technique in their base 4-3 fronts. We will probably see some of that. But look, there is an opportunity for Marcus Davenport to do something here. at least as we sit here right now. But eventually you think Josh Paschal is going to come back, but it's been kind of an eerie injury. They haven't said much about it. Initially, they were like, yeah, he should be good for week 1. And then Dan Campbell just said, unfortunately, he's going to be more of a midseason return. And it's, this hasn't gone as we hoped. So kind of a suspicious thing. This kind of feels like one of those injuries that you look back on the year and it's like, dang, Josh Paschal came back week 16 and wasn't very good for them. I don't know much about it, but it's a scary injury at this point. Obviously, he's a factor in terms of this being a wild card unit. Pascal's a good early down run defender and has even shown some flashes as a pass rusher. They spent a second round pick on him, and that's another key injury here, frankly. So the edge room opposite of Aiden Hutchinson is about as bad as it gets right now, but that's a big caveat when you're talking about Aiden Hutchinson being as good as he is. Now the interior D line, they got some pieces here. Roy Lopez, fine signing there. I mean, they have got some beef on the interior of this D line. He's another big guy that can do a little bit of everything. Especially as a 3 technique, but he could even play a little bit of nose. Mekhi Wingo is interesting. Didn't do too much in his rookie season, but one of the best first steps you'll see for a defensive lineman. I do think the opportunity for him to play a little bit of 5 technique and defensive end here is there for him, where he should be able to defend the run a little bit better there. And he was super young when he came into the league. Ended up being a 6th round pick, but he was 21 years old and just was super raw coming out. So I do think he can surprise potentially. Patrick O'Connor, undersized guy, kind of a hybrid end type. Tyler Lacey, same deal. They pick him up from Jacksonville. Chris Smith played a little bit for them last year. But yeah, the Levi Onwuzurike injury is a bummer as well, as we described kind of in the offseason changes. You would feel a lot better about this with McNeil missing the first 4 weeks if you could at least say, okay, Levi Onwuzurike, who's a good 3 technique and showed some good stuff as a pass rusher last year. I think they were pretty damn excited that they got him as cheap as they did. I think they were prepared to lose him, but the market wasn't there for some reason. But sadly, that's been the story on Levi Onwuzurike just as much as it's been on Marcus Davenport. And probably why he was so cheap was maybe the physicals were just not good on him. And here we go again with this. But yeah, it's interesting because there's optimism for this D-line and there's just so much going on with injuries. And between this and the interior of the offensive line, those are going to be your 2 key wild cards that we'll talk about here today. Whereas now as we kind of turn our attention to the 2nd and 3rd levels of this defense, there's a lot less in terms of question marks. So let's go to the linebackers. We'll talk about their offseason changes here. I have them as slightly upgraded at linebacker. They get Derek Barnes back. They're excited about that. He went down early and missed the season. And then they also picked up Zach Cunningham. So nothing major in terms of the true starters here. But as we break down this group of linebackers, Derek Barnes is a part of the idea that the Lions play 44% of their snaps in base. And that was without a lot of Derek Barnes last year. So they're going to be out there about 40% of the time with a 4-3 defense with 3 linebackers out there. So that's different than most teams. It's different than every team, as we broke down earlier. But this is a really good group of linebackers. Maybe no superstars here, but a ton of balance. And this is one of those teams that does have a true rotation, and they put these guys in the best position to succeed. So they come out 6th to 7th for my overall linebacker ranking. A little bit lower for coverage, 12th to 18th. But damn near at the top for run defense, 2nd to 4th for linebacker run defense, where they are excellent. So your 2 core starters are going to be Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell. Alex Anzalone brings the balance, the veteran leadership. I don't feel the need to spend too much time on Alex Anzalone, but he's a solid athlete, solid at getting off blocks, solid to good zone IQ, frankly. And he just kind of is your floor raising, right down the middle, straight shooting, good starter that's going to be out there all the time. And then Jack Campbell's mostly going to play on every down. There's probably going to be some dime packages where they take him off and put in like Malcolm Rodriguez when he comes back, maybe. But maybe not, depending on just how many strides Campbell can take in coverage. And even then we're talking about, 5% of the time. So He's mostly going to be out there for all 3 downs. It's just he is like slower and, doesn't quite have the range in coverage. Even if he's shown some flashes in coverage because of his zone IQ, where he can make plays, it's just his ability to get into position is a little bit harder. But what he really brings to the table is the run defense, where he is quickly ascending to making a case for who the best run defending linebacker in the league, not named Fred Warner, is. And that's not a huge surprise given his college tape. With his size, his block shedding ability, his IQ, he was an elite run defending prospect, and it's translated very quickly. I wouldn't say he's an elite NFL run defending prospect quite yet. I would argue it is literally impossible for a first and second year linebacker in the modern NFL to be a genuinely elite run defender to the level that like Fred Warner is today, or even like to take a step below that, even where like Demario Davis has been over the years. Like the amount of things that get put on your plate to defend the run at this position in the NFL, it is inevitably going to take some time. And for Campbell, that doesn't have the elite athleticism to lean on, he is quick. I love his agility, and that helps him get off blocks and stuff. But if you're talking about like consistently get into the right place at the right time, he's going to need to have, kind of that Bobby Wagner-esque processing as well. Like we've seen that late stage Bobby, like he literally is late stage Bobby Wagner when you really think about it, just without 15 years of backlogged NFL experience, right? But from a like athletic profile, that's kind of who he is. But I will say this could be the year that it just shows, and he kind of takes that final step, and he's just consistently dominant, where he's just a consistent game in, game out, game wrecker in run defense. So could be an area for this roster to get even better at linebackers right there for the run defense with Campbell. And then, getting Derek Barnes back is nice. He's their strong side linebacker. And when they run that base 4-3, they play a lot of Malcolm Rodriguez among some other guys last year, and those guys are good. I like Rodriguez. We'll talk about him. But really, in theory, if you're going to have that Sam linebacker that's kind of a, you're going to chart that as a base 4-3 because it is 3 linebackers, and Barnes is a linebacker. But Barnes has that on-ball edge experience. That's what he played at Purdue. That's what he was coming out, and they converted him. So, a lot of those kind of 4-3 over fronts where he's actually kind of playing edge for them. And frankly, when we could have mentioned that with the D-line a little bit when we were looking at that second edge spot and asking, who's going to play edge other than Marcus Davenport. That's my fault for not bringing it up then, but we're bringing it up now. His utility in that role is big time for this defense. It really is. And they had Trevor Nowaski doing that role, and it just, it was Trevor Nowaski. They get an upgrade there, getting Derek Barnes in there. And he's got a lot of speed. He's got a lot of traits. They brought him back off the injury as their third linebacker at $8 million a year. Like, this is a real player for them. So those 3 are your core. And then Malcolm Rodriguez, they like to rotate in. He's kind of their spark plug, Energizer Bunny type of guy. Eventually, Rodriguez is going to hit the open market, in my opinion, and someone should look at him as a starter because he was good as a rookie, and he's been good in a rotational role. He's going to start the season on the pup, but I think he's going to be back. And he's the fastest linebacker on this group. So I do think some of their dime defenses, they'll take Campbell off the field, give him a breather, get a little bit more range and athleticism for coverage. And then they'll just kind of mix him into all 3 of those spots. He can do a little bit of the third linebacker stuff. He can defend the run. He can cover. He's just a really nice guy to kind of rotate in, keep all these guys fresh. They're not going to have that right away, but hopefully he can get back out there, play some good football, and then definitely going to be an interesting free agent, in my opinion, in the offseason, because I don't think you pay him as well after you already paid Derek Barnes as their third linebacker. But they signed Zach Cunningham, kind of a sneaky signing. He's another one of these guys that, like, Detroit has showed their hand. They love signing these injury-prone dudes. Davenport, Carlton Davis last year, DJ Reader, same deal. And Cunningham has not been able to stay healthy, and he hasn't played as well when he's been out there, but he, just like 3-4 years ago, was one of the better run-defending linebackers in the entire league. I'm a big fan of Cunningham when he was in his prime. It's just we haven't seen that for a long time now, but why not? It's not like he's that old. He's just had a lot of injuries that have slowed him down, I think. And then Nowaski and Grant Stewart are still on this team as backups and special teamers. So it's a very, very deep linebacker group. Even if you don't have that true superstar talent, we'll see if Campbell can emerge as a superstar run defender. And if that happens, he's probably going to get into the top 10 linebacker range this season. I think that's certainly possible for him. But their balance and having the right complementary group of skill sets is absolutely in place here. So big asset there in the second level of the defense. And then we'll go to the secondary here. Definitely some changes here. So at cornerback, they let Carlton Davis go. Ennis Rakestraw, their second round pick from 2024. The 2024 draft is unfortunately going to miss this season. And then Kendall Vildor is out the door. But they did make a big signing of DJ Reed from the Jets. I think is actually a slight upgrade over Carlton Davis. As a player, I think he's a little bit better. They're pretty much the same, but Davis was always going to have injury questions. That's what happens with him, is he misses time, and it happened at the wrong time last year. He went down week 15 and wasn't available in the playoffs. They didn't want that to happen again. DJ Reed's a much more durable player, so even if they're the same player on the field, the availability, I think, makes this slightly upgraded. And then they did sign Avonte Maddox as well. So I said slightly upgraded at corner, and then neutral at safety. The only loss there is a Fetu Melifanu, who barely played last year. And then just kind of some dart throws. Daniel Thomas, Rock Yassin, Thomas Harper getting brought in at safety. So I said neutral. But let's go through this secondary. It's a pretty clean-cut conversation. It's a really good unit. They rank pushing the top 5 for secondaries in the league. They rank 5th to 10th for me. Really a bunch of groups that are on the cusp of being in that top 5, but just have maybe a question mark or two. And in the case of the Detroit Lions, that's Terrion Arnold. We can just start there. I mean, first-round pick in that 2024 draft. And not to take victory laps or anything, but I try to warn Lions fans, like, look, he's a fun player. I think he's a high floor player, and he was a solid starting caliber player in his rookie season, but he wasn't great, right? Like, you could get to Terrion Arnold. Anytime you draft a cornerback that just doesn't have great top speed, asking that guy to be great out the gate is a lot to ask, because you need to have all of the mental side of things figured out. Your technique needs to be perfect. Your route anticipation needs to be perfect. And it was just going to be a lot to ask of Terrion Arnold that was a one-year breakout at Alabama. So I still think there's potential in there. Even if he doesn't have incredible top speed, he is super quick. He's super tough. He's absolutely their style. He can play really good press man coverage. But there's just a lot of room to improve with his press as well, in terms of sticking his strikes, keeping his feet moving. If he is what he was last year, he's a low-end number 2 corner. Let's face it. But there's potential for him to get better. And that's your wild card for this secondary. If he can break through as just a good player, not even a great player, then I think Detroit will clear as a top 5 secondary this season. But it's not like the floor is so bad either that you can just consistently pick on him and he's a weak link. You know what I'm saying? The rest of these guys are locked and loaded, and I feel really good about who they are. DJ Reed, we know who he is. I mean, this has been him for years now. He's been probably the best number 2 corner over the last 2 years, and he's good enough to be a number 1, just as Carlton Davis was for them last year. Different physical builds, but honestly, play style, press man coverage, physical mentality, kind of the same idea. There's going to be more situations where he's going to face like bigger bodied true number 1 wide receivers when he has to be this team's number 1, and he does lack some of the length to compete with your, maybe, if they run into, I don't know, your Mike Evans, your T. Higgins, Tet McMillan, those types. You might have a little bit more of a harder time against those guys, but I love DJ Reed. Definitely fits like everything the Detroit Lions are all about. One of the just most scrappy physical corners in the league. So I think he's going to be really good here. Amik Robertson broke through as a nice starting slot for them last year. I still think he's a little bit streaky, but man, he had some games last year, like infamously, like gave Justin Jefferson the hardest time maybe any corner has given Justin Jefferson in his time in the league. Really an impressive outing. That's not going to be the case with him every single week, but he's definitely settled down here. He was kind of he was a cheap signing, really smart to give him a 2-year deal. He was always going to be kind of available as an option to start if they needed it, and they did need it last year. Rakestraw didn't stay healthy. Davis got hurt, and it was really when Davis got hurt that Robertson played his best ball, I think. So I don't think he's going to like break through as a superstar or anything like that, but he's a floor-raising, solid slot corner, and he can even step outside and play perimeter if you need him to, but I think they like him in the slot. Wouldn't be stunned if Terrion Arnold started to struggle if they wanted to flip it and just see how it goes, because I do think Terrion Arnold has potential as a slot player too, but it's a good player there. And then best safety duo in the league, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch. No hesitation to say that. I mean, Brian Branch especially, like, he's phenomenal, dude. Like, for him to just step out and just be a safety for this team, I wasn't really sure how that was all going to play out, because I questioned it, because I was like, I mean, he's already like the best slot corner in the league as a rookie. Do you really want to like take him away from the ball and put him at safety? And it didn't freaking matter. He found the ball anyway. It gave you something that's frankly probably harder to find, like a high-end coverage safety. There's just not a ton of those going around. He showed like legit range and instincts on the back end that he just hasn't played a lot of deep safety in his competitive football career. Maybe he did in high school, but he was a slot at Bama. He was a slot in his rookie year. But yeah, that's all right. I can play single high. I can play two shell. Like, I got it. And again, case number 50 at this point of like, you don't need 4.4 speed to be a great safety. 4.58 is honestly like the money zone for a lot of these guys. Xavier McKinney, Brian Branch, Kyle Hamilton. I think all those guys literally ran exactly 4.58. You can check me on that if I'm wrong, but yeah, he's phenomenal. And then Kirby Joseph has broken through. He gets the big contract extension, and I didn't have any hesitation with that. A lot of times these safeties, when they have these like big interception number seasons, I'm a little hesitant because those can be really fluky. And anybody that's watched this channel knows I'll call it out when I think a defensive back's picks are fluky and not going to repeat. Now, is he going to repeat 9 interceptions again? No, that's super unlikely. But with his play style, I mean, really all you're looking for in a deep safety is like 3 things are key if you want to talk about can a guy be a superstar deep safety. I think number 1 is don't bust coverages. Don't allow those explosive plays in the back end. And Kirby Joseph was credited just twice on the season with plays of 20-plus yards. He allowed a 51-yarder against Minnesota, Week 7, and he allowed a 31-yarder Week 13 against the Bears. Other than that, prevented big plays. So I would say that's probably the starting point for a deep safety. And when they do go single high, he's typically going to be their free safety, because then Brian Branch, when you're playing cover 1, like he's effectively another slot corner in that type of situation out of a single high look. So that flexibility is just perfect. And then if they go cover 3, it'll typically be Kirby Joseph rotating up top too. So that's those two together is about 50% of the time. Kirby Joseph's just a true center fielder for this team. So if we're talking about that role, again, prevent big plays, number 1. Number 2, I would say be a consistent tackler, which ties into like preventing big plays. You don't need Kirby Joseph to come down in the box and shed blocks or anything, but like just take good angles, get guys to the ground, limit big plays there. Kirby Joseph missed tackle rate this season dropped from 15% in 2023, which was not good. He improved that dramatically. That's a huge part of my confidence saying Kirby Joseph is a superstar, top, 7, 8 safety in the league. We'd have to really line them all up. There's a lot of good safeties today, but he improves it 2 times over. He goes from 15% missed tackle rate in 2023 all the way down to 6.3% last year. That's outrageous growth. Hopefully he can keep that up. I think he can based on the tape. And then the third thing you want to see is pair what we said with our first point. Don't bust coverages. Be conservative when you need to, but also have an aggressive mentality and ball skills and understand route concepts and when you can take risks. He absolutely has that. We've seen it in previous seasons. This dude was like out there baiting Aaron Rodgers early in his career for picks, and we saw 9 picks last year, and like he's nearing like Jesse Bates territory, honestly, as that elite free safety. The year he had last year was very Jesse Bates-esque. And if he continues to repeat those types of seasons, that's where he's going to find himself. I don't necessarily put the up arrow on Kirby Joseph, but I sure as hell am not doing what I'm doing with a lot of other safeties that get big interception numbers and saying, oh, he's going to take a step back. The final interception number might not be there, but I think the overall play is here to stay. So having the best safety duo in the league, goes a long way towards them being, pushing to be a top 5 secondary. You've got a good, maybe not great number 1 corner, and then a good, maybe not great slot corner, and just questions at CB2 with the young Terrion Arnold. So pretty clean-cut starting picture for the secondary. They do got to stay healthy. Really, nobody you want to see get out there a whole lot. And Ennis Rakestraw getting hurt would be the bummer there, because Rakestraw in year 2 you were hoping was going to have better health, and he was a fun round 2 pick. Had a lot of like Roger McCreary comps for me. They're not going to get that this year. It's starting to add up for him in terms of injuries. That's a bummer. But you definitely are feeling a lack of depth there, and tough reality is cornerbacks do get hurt. So it's something to keep an eye on with this Lions team. Khalil Dorsey had to play a little bit last year. It was not pretty from a coverage angle, physical player, special teamer, that kind of type. And then they did sign Avonte Maddox. He has slowed down quite a lot. I thought he looked better last year in Philadelphia, was in better shape. But, once upon a time was one of the better slot corners in the league. And there was times like 2023 especially where I just was like, dude, that does not even look like Avonte Maddox, who once upon a time was like super quick. Felt like he was stuck in quicksand. So hard to expect too much from him coming in at this point. Maybe he could surprise. And then in terms of safety depth, it's entirely unproven. But I'm actually kind of interested in all these guys, and wouldn't be surprised if these guys could play well if they had to step in. Daniel Thomas, I liked him as a prospect. Never really got that opportunity in Jacksonville, but he's their type. He loves to hit. They're going to love him on special teams, and he's got decent speed on the back end. They signed Rock Ya-Sin, which technically he would be cornerback depth. I guess I can't sleep on that. In an emergency situation, he can still play corner, but not all that well. I'm more interested in him as that kind of Efetu Melifonwu role. Another guy that they took from corner and kind of made that dime safety role for them. Would be something new for Rock Ya-Sin, but I think it's time for a change on him, where he's kind of lost it after a good start to his career. And then Thomas Harper gets cut by the Raiders. Mistake by the Raiders, in my opinion. That new look staff wasn't watching the tape last year. Thomas Harper played really well. I had the eyes on him in the Raiders deep dive, and the Lions smartly pick him up. He definitely would have some potential if he were to get a look. He's got the testing numbers, and Notre Dame safety, played well in limited looks last year. So there's some fascination with the safety depth, just unproven. And that rounds out your defense there. So like I said, you're in a pretty good position, I think, on paper to feel good about this defense. Holding up their end of the bargain much better, especially in the big games. They ultimately had like a pretty well-ranking defense last year, but it was mostly more towards the start of the season, and certainly felt like when they needed their defense to be good, they weren't good. I think this year, when they need this defense to be good, I think they're going to step up much better. So I have them ranking as the 7th overall defense, our number 1 ranked run defense, and then still pretty good for pass defense, ranking 16th. But there is upside for that to be a top 10 pass defense as well. If they hit some of those green lights with injuries on the defensive line, and if Terrion Arnold can take a step forward, I think you are talking about a top 10 pass defense as well. But even if this is what they're getting, which is the 7th overall defense in the league, that's a little bit better against the run, maybe a little bit more up and down against the pass, but still pretty good. You pair that with still a very great offense, and yeah, that's how you get your number 3 ranked Detroit Lions. Now, we do still got to talk about the special teams before we really round this deep dive together here. And this is also our number 1 ranked special teams. So they are rock solid on this side of the ball. You got a great young kicker in Jake Bates. Unreal find for this team. Technically wasn't a rookie, but this was his first season kicking last year. And he was one of the best kickers in the league last year. Obviously, Brandon Aubrey exists. So hard to take that crown. But he was the 4th graded kicker per PFF last year. Now, as we're trying to be predictive with our special teams formula, I kind of nerf 1-year grades because we know the up and down nature of this position. So after the nerf is applied, he comes out as the 8th ranked kicker for the purposes of this series. But like, they're obviously in a really good spot if he can keep up what he did last year. And then you got Jack Fox is a top 10 graded punter. Khalif Raymond is an awesome return man, one of the best in the league, and he does both. So your specialists themselves are great, and then you're talking about probably the most elite culture in the league, a team with depth at linebacker. They graded out super well by the PFF and DVOA team grades last year that take a look at kick coverage and all that important stuff too. So they were 7th per PFF and 1st per DVOA. So this is the number 1 ranked special teams as well. Yet another asset for this Lions team. And honestly, as we can start to summarize what we've talked about here and then take a look at their schedule, it's a very fun conversation with Detroit because you look back at everything we've said today and Jesus, they still have some ridiculous strengths on this roster. The pass catchers, the running backs. Offensive line is still a relative strength compared to the league. They have question marks there, but it's still in a pretty good spot. Defensive line, I think, again, similar to the O-lines, question marks, but still a relative strength. Linebackers, secondary, all strengths for this team. And then special teams as well on top of all that. It's like that's the longest list of strengths that we've had for any team in this deep dive series so far. And that's why they're at number 3 in these power rankings. But it's unique in the sense that, well, there's still a lot of change up here that there's some wild cards that things could go wrong. And some of these are areas where you might end up pulling back some of those strengths if things go wrong. Like the interior of the offensive line is obviously a huge deal. If it is catastrophically bad, which could happen, it's hard to see that happening with how well they've coached things in Detroit. But if that happens, yeah, you peel back offensive line as a strength. If things go really wrong with recovery, if Aleem McNeil's not able to get back to being himself, especially, but you got some other stuff going on there. Like, okay, then you peel back defensive line from being a strength. All of a sudden, your trenches aren't as dominant. And then what if these coordinators are more of an issue? Right now, I actually don't list any weaknesses for Detroit, but what if the coordinators are an issue and the play calling is an issue and Kelvin Sheppard's in over his head as a DC? All right, we're starting to see some more warts on this team that we're hoping can win a Super Bowl. And what if David Montgomery isn't his old self, coming off the injury with everything we talked about with him? Well, Jahmyr Gibbs is still awesome, but you lose that thunder and lightning dominant strength that this team has been over the years. And maybe instead of the 4th ranked running back room, this is more of the 8th best running back room in the league. I think if Montgomery isn't his old self and Christian McCaffrey and Ashton Jeanty are great, yeah, that is probably more of where Detroit is. So there's just aspects of this team that I'm not ready to commit to saying are issues for this team. It's more of just well, we got to see where this goes because there's no doubt the bar has been risen here. Detroit, despite their losses, is still hoping to get back to the Super Bowl. And if they don't land on the right side of the coin with some of these things we're talking about, well, yeah, they're probably not going to live up to this 3rd ranking and could be, what a lot of people are saying and be a little bit more of a disappointment this year. So it's a fascinating combo on Detroit. But let's take a look at their schedule and see what sort of favors their opponents are doing for them here this year. So it's not an easy schedule on top of all this. Their division, as we know, is a gauntlet. And then they'll be playing the NFC East, a very good division, and the AFC North, another very good division. And then they also drew a game out of the AFC at Kansas City. This schedule's really hard for them, and I think that's why Vegas has their over-under just at 10.5 wins, which for a team that won 15 games last year, that's tough to see if you're a Lions fan. And believe it or not, Lions fans, Vegas actually has the Packers as favorites in this division now following the Micah Parsons trade. And the Packers are favorites now week 1 by 2.5 points. It's going to be a really fun game here. But man, I think you can make a case this is one of the harder schedules we've seen in this series, especially timeline-wise, right? Aleem McNeil is going to start the season on the PUP. They have to play 2 of their hardest games in the first 3 weeks at Green Bay and at Baltimore. And then week 5, you got at Cincinnati. That's not easy. I still think they're favorites against the Bengals, but if Aleem McNeil has to miss more than 4 weeks, okay, getting into week 5, you got the Bengals, and then you got at Kansas City week 6, Tampa Bay week 7, bye week, Minnesota, then you got at Washington, at Philly. The start to this team's season is brutal. If anybody can, trounce these teams and deal with it and figure a way to win these games, it's going to be the Detroit Lions, but I'm saying the schedule is not doing the Lions any favors for their expectations. So they're up against it, man. This is, with this schedule and with everything they're dealing with, this is probably the strongest regression candidate in the league. But as we've talked about here today, like, God, there's still a lot to work with, man. I don't want to be overly negative about this team. I personally still think it's crazy, and I'm a Packers fan. I still think it's crazy that Detroit shouldn't be favored to win this division with everything they've done the last 2 years. I think that's probably where the betting value is on this team, because the NFC North is all dealing with the majority of these opponents anyway. So they've got similar, conflicts in terms of winning games and stuff. Like, there's a chance where, even though what we saw last year, 15 games is what it took to win this division, and Minnesota had 14 and Green Bay had 11, 12. 11 games might win this division this year with, everybody kind of beating each other up a little bit more and more tough opponents on the schedule. So I like them. I like the division odds bet there. The over-under, it's fine. Like, if you believe in Detroit, I'm not going to stop you from betting them to win 11, 12 games. For me, the math actually says that's a good line with this schedule is about 10.5 wins. So that is where we're going to end it here for this Lions deep dive. So we got 2 more of these to go. You guys have to let me know what you think of today's analysis on Detroit. Who do you think comes in number 2? Who do you think comes in number 1? We got Philly and Baltimore left. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Beyond that, please do hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed on the way out here. And just thank you so much for watching. We're here. We're in week 1, man. This is exciting stuff. I will see you as soon as possible, though, for that next deep dive as we finish this grind to get this series done. But thank you, and peace out.